Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And I do apologize that this is again another impromptu live stream, but I'm dependent on getting the information and putting it up when it becomes available. So this is part 2 of the discussion on secession that was actually initiated last night. We had part 1. I know it's 10:30 p.m. in South Africa, so I don't expect a great deal of people to be watching it live, but here we are. Let's kick off part 2 of the discussion on secession, which includes some very prominent people, including Dr. Corné Mulder from the Freedom Front Plus, Des Palm from Cape Exit, of course Dr. Peter Hammond as the moderator, Jack Miller from the Cape Independence Party, and Robert King from the Referendum Party. They're all advocates for the Cape seceding from the rest of South Africa. Here we go. Enjoy the show.
I think most people intellectually grasp the regionalization. You want to have a regional government. You don't want to have a central government. You want to be governed by as small cells as possible, because then you can attend to the actual problems, right? Somebody far away doesn't even see your problems or can't address the problems, so they understand, okay, the provincial regionalization, which leads logically also to independence, but then on the other side of the brain, Jack, like you described that, right? There is, but we are a nation, they will not let us go. That is the one thing they almost instinctively think, and the other thing is, but there's the Constitution. It will not be constitutional. It's not legal. I think this is these two things, a kind of patriotism and the other, so they don't let us go, and the kind of thing, this is not constitutional, which is obviously also a question to you, but I also would like to hear the other opinions. What would you respond to them?
Jack, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon. So it's not the two main concerns that you found when you speak to voters is that it's not constitutional. And it's like they will not let us go. It is one nation. I'm a patriot. So we are South Africans. Yeah, it's a philosophical question to answer. Let me just give one example of this. So in the in the 2009, going into the 2011 elections, Eugene de Blanche was murdered in 2010, I believe. And our Facebook group at that point, we were doubling on a monthly basis. I mean, we grew fivefold in 2009, going to 2010. We grew fivefold in the months after Eugene de Blanche's murder. And then what happened in 2010? We had the FIFA World Cup. And the FIFA World Cup came in, and all of a sudden it was Rainbow Nation again, and South Africa was one Kumbaya movement, and all of a sudden we could see it. We felt the momentum behind Cape Independence just fell off a cliff. I mean, we could see people were talking about it. The country was on the cusp of civil war after de Blanche was murdered, and then it just took a few football games and everything's fine again. So perhaps that's a sad analogy to answer how we have found over 17 years how quickly the electorate changes. Let's give another example. Going into the 2021 elections, prior to that, we had it was June. It was the KZN riots, where literally the country almost burned to the ground. Here in the Western Cape, thousands of miles away, you couldn't get toilet paper from your shopping center. You couldn't get food out of the grocery store because people were walking out with trolleys full of food because they were worried that the riots were going to spread from KZN to the Western Cape. And then it was 6 months later, no, everything's back to normal, now it's fine, you know. So you'll notice also load shedding. We all have load shedding for 4.5 years. 4.5 years non-stop load shedding. 6 months before an election, somehow the load shedding doesn't quite hit you as much. And voters, for some reason, if the recent time and memory is comfortable enough, then Cape Independence unfortunately doesn't seem to be at the forefront of the agenda. And if the DA does what they do best and tell people that it's too close to call and the ANC is going to get in, they vote DA. That's been our sad realization. And how do I answer that? Well, things just need to get worse then, unfortunately. How bad do things need to get before voters actually realize there is one and one only solution to it, and it is Cape Independence? Otherwise, Zimbabwe, here we come.
Yes.
Yes. So another interesting analogy relating to sports is the example. There was an article recently on Cape Independence in a British newspaper, and they interviewed John Steenhuisen. And the article ends with John Steenhuisen saying, "I would not want to lead an independent Cape because then I would not have the Springboks anymore." So, I mean, that's the shallow-mindedness of some of our leaders when it comes to this. But at the end of the day, when we look at some of these cherished institutions that uphold many people's patriotism, they're all under threat. I mean, if you look at the Springboks, for example, the EFF has said they want the Springboks renamed, they want it completely changed, they want to have stricter racial quotas in the Springboks, and at some point this just completely destroys the institutions you have that uphold your patriotism. So I agree with Jack. I mean, eventually things are going to get worse for a lot of people, and people who want to avoid Cape Independence or talking about Cape Independence for those reasons are eventually going to have to face the harsh reality that many of the cherished things of South Africa won't be there anymore in 10 years. Going on the point about Cape Independence won't be possible because the national government won't allow it, or the constitution doesn't allow it. I don't think there's a single constitution in the world that actually gives you a explicit way of achieving independence. By its very nature, independence is not an issue of constitutional law, it's an issue of international law. Now, certainly, in order to call a referendum, you need to abide by the Constitution, but then in that regard we have the Constitution on our side, because it outlines the process that we need to call one. But when it comes to actually moving to being an independent state, it all depends on the international support you can muster from partners around the world, and ensuring that you have the will of the people on your side. If you have the will of the people on your side, then rulings in the Scottish and UK Supreme Courts, which form part of international law, found that in a democracy, if you have an independence referendum, you cannot ignore the will of the people. If you ignore the will of the people, then quite frankly, you're not a democracy anymore.
Couple of issues, if I may respond. I've been using the example about nation building and the recipe for nation building in South Africa over many years. And I've said, and it remains true, the South African government and everybody's process after '94 for nation building failed. Why? Because the concept of nation building around sport. And it tries to create a feel-good feeling about sport. It started off in 1995 with the World Cup, when Mr. Mandela wore the number 6 jersey and everybody said it's fantastic. And how long did that last? A few weeks or a few months, and then it was over and done with. Then we had the World Cricket Cup a few years later, here in Cape Town. I think South Africa fell out in the quarterfinals and it didn't last so long, so the feeling wasn't too positive. Then correctly, the World Cup in 2010, it was magical. For a few months, the thieves even stopped stealing things. It was just perfect. Everything was beautiful. How long did that last? It didn't last. Then it was again the World Cup again. So we are stumbling from one sporting event to the next to try and create this impression of togetherness, but it doesn't last. It will never last. Why? If you want to create something that is truly going to last, you have to look at the diversity of South Africa, not as a weakness, but as a strength. There's a reason why we have 11 official languages. Recognize that diversity, accommodate the diversity, and use that as strong building blocks, and you can work out a constitutional dispensation where everyone will feel accommodated. And you don't have to have exactly the same level of self-determination. Some provinces may say, no, we don't want to have anything. I always say we will still be busy with the Western Cape and struggling to get what we want when KZN declares independence around the Zulu monarchy. It could happen overnight. So there are different permutations that can play out in that instance. If you talk about constitutions, one of the most beautiful examples of how it could be done is the Ethiopian constitution. Go and have a look at the Ethiopian constitution. It's a federal state, and it consists of the different states, and the states accommodate the different ethnic groups in Ethiopia. And there's a procedures written in the constitution that you have to go through. There's 2 referendums that you have to participate before you can go to independence. So nobody has done that yet, but it's accommodated in that instance. If I may just say about the people in the Western Cape, why don't they vote for independent parties in much larger numbers? It's because people fear change. They are unsure. What would it mean? What will it entail? They know what they've got at the moment. Things work like this, and they can go in their car, and they can go to the Kruger Park, and they can come back, etc., etc. I take my own mother. My mother stays in Pretoria. She argues with me all the time. Are you sure about this thing? Why are they saying that? Because they feel that, what about them? Will they be excluded? So most people just want to have safety as long as it's going to be okay in my lifetime. People are not capable of seeing over the hill what's coming in future. And many people in the Western Cape resist the idea. However, it can change overnight. When we saw the riots in KZN 2-3 years ago, imagine those same riots happen again, but this time not focused against property but against minorities. It can happen tomorrow. Then I can assure you independence will happen overnight. And I'm not saying that's a good idea that we should have that, but that's just the reality that may play out. So it's a very difficult thing. If I can just make a point with regard to the ULA process. Self-determination, independence is a very difficult process. It's not something that can happen just overnight. And with all due respect, I think you referred to Elroy Baron. Elroy is a councillor of the Freedom Front Plus in Mossel Bay. He's one of my councillors. He serves in all my structures. if there was this internationally recognized legal process, that you just need to do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, somebody rings a bell and you're independent. Why is Palestine not independent yet? What about Scotland? What about Quebec? There are so many examples. It doesn't work that way. Yes, there are international routes that you can follow. You can apply pressure. You have to do that. But in the end, the international community will only follow depending on your internal processes and the will of the people in that area. If the people don't demonstrate the need for this, the international community is not going to get involved and say, we think you should be independent. They will not do that. What happens normally is international law will recognize de jure what exists already de facto in a country. And that's the challenge that we will have to go through and get more awareness and get more and more people to accept the idea and to push forward. Now, if you look at the current political dispensation of what's happening at the moment in this election, and I'm very honest with you, if in this election we succeed with a multi-party charter to remove the ANC from government, and we put in there a new government of, let's say, the good people, I can assure you, the idea of Cape independence will get a setback and people will say, well, maybe it's not necessary. Maybe we can change South Africa for the better. Who knows? On the other hand, if another coalition comes to power, ANC, Controversieswe, EFF, it will be to the benefit of Cape independence because it will perhaps shock people to understand where we are going in South Africa. People shy away from those realities. They just want to have a peaceful little world where they are at the moment. They don't want change. It's our job as politicians to see over the hill what is coming, and we can see that. And we have not been proven wrong in any way. It has been playing out year after year, and it's becoming worse and worse and worse. I was in a debate the other day where somebody was phoning in from Mpumalanga, obviously a DA supporter. Yes, but Cape Town is beautifully clean. I said, when have you been to Cape Town lately? It's not beautifully clean. I can assure you it's not. But that's the kind of perception that people would like to have. And obviously the DA is making use of that to create this false impression. Everything is just moonshine and roses. And that's why I've always said the DA will not succeed in exporting their form of government to the rest. As long as we don't go this route, we will only allow and import the destruction. Because of my work, I go to Joburg, Tshwane, Gauteng every 10 days. You know what I do? I sometimes take some time, I just go into a shopping center, I sit on a bench, and I watch the people, just for a little bit. And you can see month after month how things are going down, down, down. But the people who stay there can't see it. They don't realize that. They think that's how it should be. If you drive in Pretoria now, my mother stays there. I was in Joburg on Monday evening. The street lights are not working. The roads are full of potholes. It's like in deep, dark Africa. It's really physically just dark. No safe, nowhere safe, nothing. Why won't that happen to the Western Cape in time? It will happen here as well. And that's why we've got a huge challenge. But the difficult thing is this. There's not a magic wand that you can just independence. It doesn't work that way. It's a difficult process.
Can I ask that?
Sure.
Are you, as a party then, for you're a party of the National Front, that you are supporting Cape
Yes.
independent, Cape secession based?
Sure. The point is this, and we've made that point all along. There are different forms and now, but let me first say this. The Freedom Front Plus is a national party with representation across South Africa. And we participate across South Africa on a national level and in all 9 provinces. The core of the party is self-determination, and we focus specifically on minorities. But we are saying the following. There are different forms and levels of self-determination, because this form of self-determination may be effective in this part of the country. But everybody understands the whole idea of independence seems that it can only work successfully in the Western Cape for various reasons. So from our perspective, it's not a question of either or, it's and. So while you can do this, we fully support Western Cape independence. We're involved in that on a daily basis. My campaign in this election is about independence. My posters will say choose freedom. That's what it's about. But we also need to understand, and that's part of the difficulty, many people in the Western Cape do have family in the rest of South Africa. And you cannot, the question is, if you are a national party, You cannot just walk away from that and say, well, we are not, don't have any interest in that, etc., etc. Time will tell in the future how we develop this, because we understand as well. When we get to Western Cape independence, and we will get to that, it will not be in our interest to have on the other side of our border an absolutely aggressive enemy kind of situation. It will not be to our benefit. We would like to prevent that. So even if we go for independence, and we will have independence, we will never be not part of Southern Africa, although it will be a different country. You will still have economic realities, economic ties, it will still be there. Like, visualize what's happening in the European Union. You cannot become completely isolated. You don't want that. I always say in terms of independence, and that's the first prize. The first prize will always be to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of an internationally recognized negotiated settlement. That's the first prize. You can look at other examples internationally. That's the first prize. But you won't get to that point unless you have sufficient support and pressure that whoever you need to talk to, whoever you need to negotiate to, cannot ignore what you are saying, because you have such strong support, they have to deal with it.
Yes,
I
next
want
question.
to say something about that. What you are saying, what you are actually saying at the back of all of this is, if there is a secession order, you probably will have to fight for it. It's your border somewhere along the line. Like all over the world it's happened. You're trying to prevent that. That is why you're going the legal route.
Sure.
But on the other hand, you might have to be able to,
Yes.
to fight for it.
Of course.
And that is why you need the people
Of
to
course.
totally be with you, because you're going to need them to fight.
No, let me just try to explain it this way. It depends on how strong you feel about freedom. Do you really want to be free? Do you really want to be able to take your own decisions? Other people are not going to say, well, we think you should be free, let's give it to you. If you're not prepared to take it yourselves, no one is going to say, we want to give it to you. Now the question is, how do you achieve that? The first prize is in a peaceful manner. And you try to go a legal route, you try to go a peaceful route, you will not achieve it completely without politics. Because in the end, politics is involved, politics take decisions, politics make legislation, politics can amend constitutions. You cannot do that completely from outside and hope somebody else will do it on your behalf. It's got to be political inside and outside. But let's say you come to, and that comes back to the question just now that said people are scared because they will not allow that. Yeah, of course they won't. So what? Why is it up to us to say we can't have it because they don't want to give it? Let me give you an example. In the 60s and 70s, the ANC wanted one person, one vote, black majority government. The National Party said, no, we're not going to allow that at that time. What did the ANC do? Did they say, well, they refuse it, so we give up on our ideal? No. They continued to struggle, they changed their methods, and in the end they achieved their objective. If we are serious about freedom and independence, we have to do the same. I'm not expecting them to say, yes, you can have it. I expect them to say you can't. And then we take the decision when we come to that point. And I'm the first one I will tell you, Section 235 does not allow full independence. I know that. But that does not mean that we're not going to have it.
Yeah, if I can maybe add to that. I think the reason why every single person on this panel is sitting here is because none of us here are going to take up arms and start some civil unrest. We have mechanisms in place, and as Corne says, I think the political pathway is the ideal pathway to achieve this, the laws that support it. To add to that, civic organizations like Des Palms, Cape Exit NPO, like AfriForum, like Kaap Forum, like Sakeliga. There are many, like OTA, the tax organization. There are many civic organizations that are actually building grassroots, decentralized frameworks that actually take the place of government, because government is failing to deliver those services. So you're finding OUTA in certain communities, is saying no, we're going to ring fence some resources that's not going to be paid in tax to the national government, and we're going to use that to fix potholes and things like that. And Afri Forum has done some fantastic work in a similar sense. So and that's a question that we've gotten for 2 decades now. It's always like, oh, the government won't allow it, it's going to be civil war. I really, if it's going to be civil war, then I'm quitting. That's not what we're here to do. I don't think any of us sitting here are trying to push for anything like that. I think people have an unreasonable and irrational fear of government. That the government's going to just come with helicopters or something and they're just going to arrest every single person that voted for a pro-Cape Independence Party and throw you in prison. It's just not going to happen. I mean, just to flesh it out a little bit more, we've had 2 incidences where the South African military have been used under ANC rule. The first was when they went into Lesotho, and the second was when they went into Zimbabwe. And I think Lesotho, they lasted just less than 24 hours. The police, I mean the military there were looting the shops, and the South African military had to call the troops back. It was an absolute embarrassment. I don't feel like we need to talk about that, but if we want to talk about that, that's reality. So there's not going to be any civil unrest, there's not going to be any conflict with the people of the Cape if the people, as Corne says, if you show to the government just how serious you are about Cape independence, not a single round will be fired. There will be no need for it. What will happen is we'll sit down in a room like this with the ANC leadership, with the EFF leadership, with the Mkhonto leadership, whoever it might be, whoever's running the national country at that time, and we'll go, listen guys, you know, we got a referendum where we got 85-90% of Western Cape voters who voted in favor of this. It's not in your interest to oppose this. Now let's talk about how do we practically put this in place. This is the national debt for South Africa. How much debt does Azania take? How much debt does the Western Cape take? What resources are we going to share? There's electricity production in this part of the country. There's electricity production in that part of the country. We're going to sell it to you at a special rate, perhaps, whatever. There's thousands of things that would happen. It would be a negotiation, and as we've said for many, many years, as was repeated now, is that when you have Cape independence, you're not going to cut off the terrain of the Western Cape and float out into the ocean. The Eastern Cape, the Northern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, all of these places are going to be our neighbors till the end of time, and we want to have good working relationships with them. And KwaZulu-Natal absolutely might get Cape independence before we do, and the rest of the country has got fantastic resources, and we've got fantastic resources, and there's no point in us not being fantastic trade partners and having good working relationships together.
Can I ask, in terms of awareness, are you targeting specific areas only, or are you across the Western Cape creating awareness of your...
Well, let me answer that.
Strategy or marketing, is it across the board? Which areas are you focusing on?
Let me answer that question in line with your question earlier about organizations not working together. This is where I have a slightly different view than perhaps was expressed earlier. I think it's fantastic that we have the ULA and Cape Exit NPO and the Freedom Front and Referendum Party and whatever, all the different groups pushing from different angles with a slightly different flavor, whatever it might be. It's a far more difficult thing to shut down and stop and control if it's amorphous like that, if it has multiple different roots to it and multiple different seeds. So I think where the movement is as a whole, yes, I agree with Des that perhaps maybe some organizations could frame things better and maybe their approach is not ideal, but that approach appeals to a certain part of the public, and rather have that part of the public on board in that manner. And the parties here, we appeal to a different part of the electorate because we have different characteristics to ourselves. So that's a positive. I don't think that's a negative. So who are we appealing to? Well, the Cape Independence Party, we have certain characteristics. We have a belief in what we think an independent Cape should look like. We believe in decentralization. We don't believe in overbearing central governments. You know, we have opinions on certain things. The Referendum Party is a lot more open to the DA and their policies, which we don't see eye to eye on. And the Freedom Front, obviously, as Corne said, they have both a national appeal as well as a provincial appeal. So everyone brings something different to the table, and I think that's the strength and the weakness.
Des, would you like to add something to that?
Sorry, Prof. Heiners, it's good to see you.
Thank you. Same likewise.
We've had many discussions in your house about this. About the fact of they won't allow it. I think a very big part, and that's what we're all busy with every day, is to educate people that it is their right, their humanitarian right under Articles 1 and 20, that they may strive for independence. We just look at it, and remember when I started off, I said I'm the only non-politician here. We tend to look at it differently. We tend to play the what-if scenario from Cape Exit side. So we have advisory panels on education, on health, on social economic, on everything. Because our what-if is, what if we get to the point where we walk out of this relationship with South Africa with nothing? And if we just look at the defense capability, that's something we look at. Our departure point is we have nothing, except that one helicopter, I think they used the fuel with a sonar address. They used the last fuel. We have people on board who are experts, the Air Force and the Navy, and if they sit you down and they tell you what the status quo is on hardware, you'll be shocked. So we cannot, we agree with the fact that there's a political process, but there is a part of that process which is a what-if part. And if we don't prepare for that what-if part, we're going to have a problem. We can't wake up tomorrow morning and say, it's 8 o'clock, kumbaya, we're independent, Dr. Corne has done his work hard, and we go to Simonstown and the last battleship there is just sunk. Or they dived with submarine into the floor going to seabed. If you don't now build your perception around that what-if, you're also going to come short, because there's a reality to this process, and that is the angle that we look at it from. Because we leave the political side to the politicians, and we work with the other realities around it.
Yes,
Also, for this problem specifically, I mean, you have done magnificent work in collecting big numbers, right? I mean, you have the biggest numbers more or less behind yourself. I mean, I think COVID was a kind of a trigger, you know, people realized, oh, there is something bad, something is wrong, we have to do something. Yeah? And now, I think we have a pretty similar situation. I mean, half of the city stinks, there's a pollution problem, people realize it's actually going down. I mean, there's a tented camps all over the shop. Why, I mean, I asked you that before, and I can't understand, why is it so difficult to leverage your community, your 800,000 people, everybody goes to his friend and says, register there, so that you finally crack the 1.6 million. I mean, that is something that should be possible.
I think Dr. Corne touched on it earlier, that people get so used to a situation. The first time I heard that we are dumping 65 million litres of raw sewage into the ocean every day, I went, wow. And we've had people up in arms, and today, so we dump 65 million litres of raw sewage in the ocean. Nobody cares anymore, because we live in this comfortable bubble in the Western Cape. And I can say this because I'm a born Capie. The people in the Western Cape are way too at ease about what's happening. Ask people that flies up to Joburg every day. And this story, and I totally agree with Dr. Corne, the story of the DA runs the best province in South Africa is only because you're better than the Oaks with an absolutely bad standard. You're not good at all. But people are living with this perception, everything's okay, I can drive to work, I've got no potholes, and that is the challenge. And that is why COVID, the only good thing about COVID and lockdown was people had to stay at home, read about what was going on, And we literally, registrations came in at a rate of about 10,000 a day. It would be nice to have another incident like that, and perhaps it will happen when we all of a sudden see a coalition between the ANC and the DA. There are certain triggers in this process. COVID was one trigger. We will have another trigger come. Robert referred to it earlier. It was actually Erika Chenoweth that did the 3.5% rule. And like he said, she said if you can mobilize 3.5% of the population behind the cause, now 3.5% of the Western Cape's population is 200,000 people. We have way more than that. But we have to get people to part the knowledge with them or to them that this may happen, not can happen, this may happen.
Next question.
So Cape Independence has been said to be a racial movement to revive apartheid. I'd like to hear your comments.
Mine.
No, let's start with Rob.
Yeah, so look, at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge we've had a very racialised history, and this has been something that's dominated our history, and it's led to a lot of disadvantages and lost opportunities for many people. And look, we can't set that aside. We can't just pretend that that didn't happen. We do have to address it, and we have to acknowledge it, and we have to take steps. We don't need to use racism to fight racism. We don't need affirmative action or BEE to fight this, but we do need to address that problem in the long term. But what we should not accept, and we should never accept it, is the weaponisation of racism, these accusations of racism to try and shut down political debate. I mean, we see that all the time in South African politics, especially against the Cape Independence movement, and it doesn't make any sense, and it's just used by people who simply don't have any better arguments to use against us. The Western Cape is South Africa's most racially diverse province. 42% of the population is coloured, 38% is black and 17% is white. So it's going to be a multiracial democracy where people from all walks of life will have a say in their future, and it will diverge from what we've seen in the rest of South Africa, and hopefully by testing out new opportunities and new policies, we can actually start dealing with many of the issues we see in society, like the massive racial inequalities that exist.
So Connor, how do you respond to that secession is racist?
Yeah, that was a logical reply. Based on facts. The question has got nothing to do with facts. I'm not saying I'm saying that kind of question. It's got nothing to do with facts. It's just a cry. If you stand for anything that they do not agree with, that's apartheid. If you stand for excellence in education, that must be apartheid. So I don't take those kind of things really seriously, because unless you completely bow to what they say, you are pro-apartheid. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. So, but you gave a correct factual reply, but the real reason behind that is an emotional kind of thing. If you do not support what we are trying to achieve, it must be apartheid, which is absolute rubbish.
Historically, the term racist didn't exist prior to the 1920s. It was Leon Trotsky who coined the term to silence opponents of the Bolshevik Revolution. If you were against communism, you were a racist. So you had to be an anti-Semite if you were against communism, because there were Jews in the Bolshevik Party. So a racist stands for rather annoying communist-inspired silencing tactic. Des, did you want to add anything to that? Have you had to deal with accusations of racism for Capex?
We've been called racists and fault starters and brown shirts, and yes, we colluded with the CIA, and it's too many to mention. It's very simple. If you read what we say we want independence for the Western Cape for all who lives within. That in itself can't be racist. And if you look at the direct democracy, where you look at what we've suggested as a canton system, where you've got direct representation on the lowest possible level of governance to your community, can't be racist. And then I agree with us whiteys are only 15% or 16%. You can outvote us any day. No, it's the go-to. A go-to is racism, a go-to is Jan van Riebeeck, a go-to is colonialism, or another Orania, we've heard them all.
If you oppose the National Party government, you're accused of being communist. If you oppose this government, you're called racist.
No.
Unfortunately, the media defends them all the time, the government as well.
Jack, would you add anything to that? Do you ever have to deal with accusations of racism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, if people arm themselves with the knowledge of history, you can just shoot these things down very easily. You know, some of the greatest losses of life we've had in this part of Africa. Look at the first concentration camps, the genocide that the white British inflicted on the white Afrikaners. So there you got whites from one tribe committing genocide against whites from another tribe. Let's have a look at another genocide that happened, the early 1800s, Shaka Zulu and the formation of the Zulu nation, depending on your historical records, wiped out anywhere from 1 million to 2 million of other black tribes. Absolute slaughterhouse. And so that wasn't the apartheid government, that wasn't any wicked whites, that was Shaka Zulu.
And Mzilikazi.
And Mzilikazi. And then let's go back even further. You know, let's go back to 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago when the Khoisan were the predominant tribe, all the way up to Central Africa, and then in the Bantu migrations, the Bantu tribes, the Ngunis, and the Bantus wiped out the Khoisan, and pretty much the only part of Southern Africa where you still had the Khoi in the sand was what today is the Cape. And in fact, that's why we also don't buy the racist arguments that the ANC throws out. History can start in 1948. History goes back to the beginning of time. And here in the Cape, we're an amazing example of, as Rob said, the majority population in the Cape is the coloured population. And how did that happen? Well, that's almost 350 to 400 years of Khoisan and Malay and Indonesian and Boer and French and English all intermarrying, and what's this language called Afrikaans? You know, I love this word pisang. Pisang is actually an Indonesian word, you know, for a banana, and you've got all these interesting terms which form, you know, die Kaapse-taal and the Kaapse cultuur. And I think it's something that when we look at history with open eyes, and we see it for what it is, and we cut away the true racists in all of this are the ANC and the EFF and anyone that complies with this agenda. If we were left to our own devices, we'd be just fine. Here's another story I want to bring up. This was in the 60s. The greatest protest in the Cape was under a man called Salem Alan, who was one of our prized Air Force fighters, and it was 500,000, 500,000. Cape Independence Party or Cape Independence supporters would love to see a protest that big. Imagine this, and they marched at night with torches to Parliament to force the apartheid government to not remove coloureds from the voting roll here in the Cape. The biggest mass protest we've ever had. But the ANC doesn't want us to know about these parts of our history. So we completely disagree with all of that. Tell me where you want to start history and I'll give you an example of how the ANC and EFF agenda is the only racist agenda in the room. It's not us, it's them.
By the way, Salem Alan was the top Allied fighter part of the whole Second World War, not just South Africa's top. He was the top Allied fighter commander. And the British in the film The Battle of Britain had Robert Shaw play the role, but they took off the South Africa ensign on his uniform and didn't give him a South African accent because they wanted to camouflage the fact that the top fighter pilot, Salem Alan, was South African. And so Robert Shaw played a British person and they camouflaged the fact that their top fighter pilot was South African because in the 60s we were not top of the pops. Next question.
We have been talking about complacency being sort of the biggest enemy of self-determination. Yeah, Dr. Corne, yes, you brought that up. Now, here behind us is the banner, the case for secession, the new book. I mean, the racial group or the heritage group with the biggest case for succession, I think, is the colored group in this country. Also the most determined. They are not complacent and happy they actually want to have it, right? My question maybe to you, Dr. Peter, why is nobody here? Except you, gentlemen.
Well, we could only invite people, but there could be logistical travel constraints. The people coming here who'd want to, but we found tremendous support in Mitchell's Plain. For example, I remember a friend in Mitchell's Plain saying, why do we not have one single coloured policeman who speaks our language in Mitchell's Plain, the local police station? They all come from the East Cape, they don't speak Afrikaans. Why can't we have our own policeman in Mitchell's Plain? And they said, all the police we've got are on the pay of the gangsters and the drug dealers, and it's scandalous. And so I know that there's far more enthusiasm for Cape independence amongst the coloured community than there is amongst the whites, and certainly amongst the English speakers, who seem pretty apathetic in many cases. They're very happy voting DA, it seems. But yes, I don't see how it's racial. In fact, I seem to remember there's at one point you're accused of being a bunch of white Afrikaners, and then you're accused of being a bunch of coloureds. That Cape Exit was just a coloured movement. And so it's interesting how you move from you're a bunch of racist whites to, well, you just represent the coloureds. And I think you get buttonholed over and over by these characters. But yes, I'm sure you found some of your best rallies have actually been in coloured communities.
Absolutely, yeah. We've had huge rallies. I mean, 2009 we had to honour the end of slavery. We marched from Boerkaap down through to Parliament, and yeah, we've had throughout the year fantastic involvement from all parts of the Cape. And as Peter said, there's an anger. There's a strong anger in the coloured community, far more than you see, especially, as Peter says, in the English-speaking white community. The white English-speaking community is the most complacent community, hands down. And the Cape white English-speaking community I mean, they're just really, I'm embarrassed to be part of it, but anyway, it's one of the voting groups that is just, very content to not see things, very happy with the status quo. We certainly aren't happy with the status quo, and we see that coloureds are very much not happy with the status quo. And as Peter says, because in Mitchell's Plain and many parts of the Cape Flats, you've got schools in which children are not being taught in their mother tongue, the hospitals in which they have life-threatening emergencies, they come in and there's doctors there who can't speak their language. You've got an active crime situation that's breaking out. They go into a police station, and you've got a police general there that's been brought in from another part of South Africa because they're trying to meet a quota system. So when there's life and death issues, and then obviously a phrase that we've heard a lot through the last 2 decades is that many coloured communities will say, ons is tweede klas burgers onder apartheid, and ons is nou derde klas burgers. And this is the truth. Yeah. It's a terrible, terrible situation to be in.
Okay, guys, that's end of part 2, and I guess we'll be having part 3 tomorrow, but let's see what happens. I'm not sure exactly what time, but we're on the money, and I just want to do a shout out to Nat who tips me off as to when these are coming up. Okay, guys, have a great evening, and over and out from Loving Life TV. Take care, and